Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Tuesday morning at about 8:30. Hope everyone's doing good. So yeah, I have been a little bit away from the channel. I've been still uploading videos. I put up last week and the week before. I recorded pretty decent amount of videos and then set them up as premieres. But it's been my schedule's been a little bit hectic as far as the regular morning kind of routine that I was doing, where I was uploading videos each morning at a particular time. Usually, I record the videos, but then upload them at the same time. But it's a little bit more infrequent at times. But they'll be coming. Everything will be coming back to pretty much its normal schedule. But there's still a whole bunch of new videos coming your way. I just recently bought a bunch of new movies. There was a big sale at my favorite place, Opera House Video. Got a bunch of movies there. Not as many as I usually get, but I had kind of a limited amount of time as far as actually being there and checking things out. But still got some really great movies. And then I also went to Bull Moose on Sunday, and that was really great. I got some really killer exploitation movies, so very much looking forward to watching those and checking those out, and then most definitely doing reviews on them. So today's show is going to be on a movie I've never talked about, and it's a movie that I've seen. It's one of those movies that, there's probably, I don't know, it's hard to say, 20 or 30 movies that I can say, maybe a little less, but that I have seen countless amount of times. Movies that I've almost seen so many times that I have kind of lost count around the times that I've actually seen them, because they are, my go-to movies, if you will, or movies that I saw at a certain time or a particular period in my life, and I just watched them like over and over again, and I got like kind of obsessed with them. And today's show is on one of those movies, and that is Mel Gibson's classic Braveheart. It's hard to believe this movie came out in 1995, which is totally crazy. When I picked this up, I bought this at Opera House Video on Saturday at the big sale, and it was funny because I had been thinking about getting this movie on Blu-ray for quite a while. I started thinking about it like, geez, you know what? This movie's always been one of my favorite movies, and probably probably my favorite movie as far as the movies that Mel Gibson has directed. I think it's definitely his best movie. He's directed some really great movies, and I'm a pretty big Mel Gibson fan for the most part. And I have a big history with this movie. I have seen it so many times, but the funny thing is I've never even seen it on Blu-ray. I saw it in the theater. I remember when it came out. I was in Maine when I saw it. I was here visiting. I was in school when I think I was in my first year of college when Braveheart came out. And I grew up in New York, and then my parents moved to Maine in '94, and I was at school at about 95. And so at college, I was at Berkeley. I was living in Boston, and my parents lived here in Maine. And I remember going to see Braveheart on basically on a break when I was home, visiting my parents or staying home. And I had a friend that I met at college. He actually came up and visited me and we saw it together. And this movie is about, well, again, I've never seen it on Blu-ray, and and it was funny because I had been thinking about, like, this would be a really, classic. It's a classic movie, and I think it would be, they don't. I don't really think they make movies like this anymore. They really don't. And so I was like, wait, you know what? I've never seen this movie on Blu-ray. This is an epic movie. It's beautifully shot, super gory, and it's a it's a great, it's a classic movie. It's right up there with, like, it harkens back to a period, in Hollywood where films like Lawrence of Arabia were coming out in the '60s and '50s. These big epic, Hollywood big budget films like Spartacus. They don't make movies like that anymore. So, this is part of that kind of classic period, even though it's much later. And I haven't really seen any movies since then that have this kind of scope. And it's truly an epic film. And it's, basically, the film is about William Wallace, who led an uprising in Scotland against British occupation and tyranny. Pretty much based on true accounts, a true story. There is a monument in Scotland dedicated to William Wallace, and it's he was a central figure that ultimately he was captured, but he did lead this revolt that led to this revolution against the British occupation. And it's funny because I remember when I saw this movie in the theater, I was blown away by it. I was just like, wow, I have not seen a movie like this in so long. And I remember I went to, when I saw this movie, when I saw Braveheart in the theater many, many years ago. And again, I'm blown away that this movie came out in 1995. It's just like, holy shit. And I went with a college friend, and he was from England. And he came from a family of doctors, pretty, a well-to-do, higher tax bracket of society, if you want to call it that. And I remember we went to Braveheart together. I think it might have been one of the first movies, if not the first movie I ever saw here locally. I remember going to see it at the Colonial Theatre in Belfast, so long ago, and I took my friend with me. He was up visiting for like a week, and he hated this movie. He hated Braveheart because he had such a problem with how they portrayed the British. And I was like, and I remember we talked about it afterwards, and I was just like, I think historically, the brutality of the British Empire, especially that time, during that time where they were conquering people and taking over countries and ruling with an iron fist, I thought it was completely accurate. If not, they could have gone into that even more. British imperialism and American colonialism is, you know, some of the worst, some of the worst atrocities you can ever imagine were committed during those times and periods. And essentially, you can't really get around it. But essentially, all of our things now that we love, from being able to get free internet, or being able to go out and buy a cheeseburger at a local store, or you know go to our local library, or whatever it is, those basic mundane things that we have, those basic, well, pleasures that we have and freedoms, all of those things were founded on blood. So there's no getting around that. And so his name was James, and he was just horrified and just so offended by how they portrayed the British occupation, which I thought was totally true. But aside from that, I thought this was like the first, actually the second movie that Mel Gibson had directed. When this movie came out, Mel Gibson had already been, well, predominantly he had a very successful, acting career. He was very well known and very well respected as an actor. And this pretty much was his first, big budget move as to, moving into becoming a director. He directed a very small, kind of independent film before Braveheart, Man Without a Face, which is actually a really great movie. He went on to direct some really great movies. Man Without a Face is a really great movie. Braveheart, of course, Apocalyptica, which is an incredible film. He also did a version of the classic Shakespeare tale Hamlet, which is really really great. He's made some really really great films, and so. But Braveheart's always been my favorite. But Braveheart was his first film where The Man Without a Face was kind of an independent film. It was a very quiet film. It was a really good drama. It was actually shot mainly. It was shot in Maine. I believe it came out a few years before, and so Braveheart was a massive, massive, undertaking, huge budget. And again, I have not. It's probably been about 6 or 7 years since I've seen Braveheart. But before that, I've seen it. It's one of those movies, like I said in the top of the beginning of the show. It's one of those movies that, in hindsight, I've probably lost. I lose count when I think about how many times I have seen this movie. When this movie came out, and I remember seeing it in a theater, I kind of became obsessed with it. It was like at that time one of my favorite movies, if not my favorite movie. And I remember watching it all the time. I became pretty much obsessed with it. I saw it in the theater, and then I think it was on HBO a bunch of times at when the cable system was much different. And I used to watch it on cable all the time. And then I also rented it a bunch of times. I remember buying. I believe I have like two or three different versions of Braveheart on DVD. And it was one of those movies. It's a very long movie. It clocks into about it's about 3 hours. It's a very long movie. I did, and I finished. I watched this version of it last night, and I forgot actually how long it is. It's actually a pretty serious undertaking, but it's one of those movies I feel like it's aged so well. It's timeless. I think it still holds up so well, if not, like case of fine wine. I think it's aged. Age does something special to this movie, and it doesn't lend itself to being dated in any way. I think the best thing Mel Gibson's ever done as far as a director and probably as an actor overall. It's a beautiful movie. The I always forget also how brutal this movie is. How just when it comes to the battle scenes and kind of the grittiness of kind of the realistic portrayal of brutal like medieval warfare. I think this movie does a job like no other. I think it's super. You know, from what I've read, I've seen lots of documentaries and interviews with Mel Gibson about this movie, and also about this period of history in Scotland. It's really really accurate, and I think it's incredibly as close as one can be. From a historical perspective. And it really has that grittiness to it, which I think is awesome. There's nothing glossy about this movie as far when it comes to the brutality of this movie. It is brutal. Like I always forget. I'm like watching it last night. I was just like, wow, I forgot how just brutal this movie is, and it doesn't pull any punches. And I can't really think off the top of my head. And I know I've seen other movies that are of this movies that have this kind of epic scale since then, but I can't really think of. And again, this movie is Jesus 95, came out in 95. But I honestly I can't think of any movies that really have that kind of brutality to it. Even like movies say like Gladiator, which great. And again, that's a very old film by today's standards. I don't remember like this movie has a certain brutality to it that is kind of unparalleled when it comes to the battle scenes. heads being chopped off and limbs being severed and blood being sprayed into the camera. Like, it's pretty brutal. But it's such a well done movie. It's a great love story. There's a lot of heart, and the cinematography is just amazing. James Horner did the film score for it. He won an Oscar for this movie. Mel Gibson won Best Director. I think he also won Best Actor for this film. It won Best Picture. It won pretty much every big Academy Award of that year of '95. It was commercially a massive hit, and it really ushered in this new period for Mel Gibson in his career, and rightfully so, because it's an incredibly epic film. I mean, and they truly, it harkens back, like I said, to some of those movies I mentioned in the beginning of the show. They Hollywood, when it comes to big budget Hollywood films, they really don't make movies like this. There's one movie that came out recently, Napoleon, that was directed by Ridley Scott, which I've heard lots of mixed things about it. And I have, like, again, I have not seen it, but I have seen other movies since then that have big epic budgets and that are these big epic tales. And none of those films really stand out to. It seems nowadays when these bigger budget kind of epic sweeping films come out, there is almost this like sanitized version of the violence. That was one criticism I had heard about Napoleon, starring Joaquin Phoenix. And again, I have not seen it, but I do want to see it eventually. But one thing that I did hear was that one of the criticisms was that the brutality of the battle scenes and things of that nature was kind of sanitized. Braveheart does not, when it comes to those things, Braveheart does not pull any punches. And again, the other thing that was so cool was to finally see this movie on Blu-ray, because I've never seen it on Blu-ray, and it's pretty spectacular. And it's a two disc set. It's got the movie on Blu-ray, and then there's a second disc which I watched pretty good amount of last night about the making of. And there's a couple documentaries, and there's a lot of stuff on here which I've never seen before. So yeah, it's definitely the best thing I think that Mel Gibson's ever done in his career. And it won 5 Academy Awards at the time when this came out, and it totally holds up. It's right up there with all of the classic Hollywood movies of a bygone era. So very very cool to finally get this on Blu-ray and to also see it on Blu-ray, because it was the first time. I've never seen it before, but classic American Hollywood cinema right here. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.